I am your state underwater archaeologist. I am very lucky to be that person. And I am really happy that you are here with me today for my presentation on the uncommon wealth that we have here in the state of Massachusetts, our underwater archaeological resources. This is me in my business attire when I'm doing diving work, just to give you a sense of how you end up becoming a state underwater archaeologist. My background, my educational background is I did coursework, PhD coursework at the University of Connecticut. I did my master's degree in the Central Plains of Texas at Texas A&M University. An Ocean State kid from Rhode Island went to the dry part of Texas to learn about underwater archaeology because the world's first program happened to be a graduate program in underwater archaeology, happened to be at Texas A&M. And my bachelor's degree, I have a double major degree in anthropology and art. And prior to me becoming the state underwater archaeologist for Massachusetts in 2019, I worked for 7 years at the University of Rhode Island's Graduate School of Oceanography, where I was a marine archaeologist working on a large study developing protocols for identifying ancient native sites offshore for the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. I also spent most of my career working as a consulting archaeologist, working for contract archaeology companies in Rhode Island, as well as here in Massachusetts and in Maryland. And so I've been a professional underwater archaeologist for 34 years. And that career has taken me as far away as Mississippi and the Gulf of Mexico, headed south. Well, actually, it's taken me to Australia. I was a keynote speaker for the Australia Asian Institute of Maritime Archaeology's annual conference. So been all the way to the other side of the earth for the job that I do and I love. Worked in Denmark on submerged Stone Age sites, and I've worked in Sweden on the Vasa. I don't know if you've ever heard of that shipwreck. It's a famous one. It's a vessel that sank in 1628 and was recovered and is today probably the premier underwater archaeology museum, just by the fact that they've got this incredible, almost 200-foot long ship that sank on its maiden voyage that the museum is built around. It's completely conserved, and you can see it. So everything from that to diving in the U.S. Navy's nuclear research submarine, the NR-1, looking for ancient shorelines 100 miles off the coast of Texas and Louisiana and the Gulf of Mexico, to working in Lake Champlain. That's where my graduate field school was. That's where I learned how to do underwater archaeology in a practical way. And then worked on most of the work that I've done in my career has actually been in Massachusetts. So that's what made me an attractive candidate for the job of state underwater archaeologist here, because so much of what I had done, of course, my career had been in Massachusetts. And it is the best job in the world. And it's the best job in the world because I get to work with young people and share my interest and knowledge about our state's underwater archaeological resources and maritime heritage, with the hope that these folks who will become adults and be the next generation of stewards will have an appreciation for the rich resources that we have here, and will, I will have imparted in them a sense of wanting to care for them and take care of them, like we try to do through my office. It's also a great job because of moments like this. I get to meet and talk to the people that I work for. I work for you. I am your state underwater archaeologist, and I take that responsibility and that role very seriously. But it's fun, and it's fun to share what we do with folks like yourself. So thank you for being here. Welcome. And enough about me. Let me talk about the office that I work for. The Massachusetts Board of Underwater Archaeological Resources was created by statute, by law, in 1973, and we are the sole trustee of the Commonwealth's underwater cultural heritage. We are part of the Massachusetts Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, and we are administratively hosted by the Office of Coastal Zone Management. Our primary charge is to encourage the discovery, the reporting, the preservation, and protection of the Commonwealth's underwater archaeological resources for the public's benefit, for your benefit. The board consists of 9 members, 9 voting members, plus the director. I'm the director at present. I'm also the board's staff. That's really my primary job. But the board membership includes the State Archaeologist's Office, the State Archivist's Office, the Director of DCR Waterways, the Director of Coastal Zone Management, the Chief of the Massachusetts Environmental Police, and the Executive Director of the Massachusetts Historical Commission, or their designees, and 3 governor-appointed members, 2 from the recreational diving community, and then 1 who is an at-large marine archaeologist. And we have 1 staff member, me, and we have no operating budget. So I am 1 person who is responsible for everything that you see in that kind of light beige coloring in the map, all the coastal waters that go out to the federal state water boundary offshore, and then all the inland waters and wetlands. They're all part of the BUAR's jurisdiction. And this is why when I give talks like this, I seek volunteers. I seek people who can help me. I seek to engage citizen scientists in the job of being stewards for the resources that we have, because it's a job that is impossible to do for just one person. And part of the reason why I do engage the public as much as I can in the stewardship of these resources is because they belong to you. By definition of the statute, the Commonwealth holds title to the resources. That means you, as residents and citizens of the Commonwealth, these resources belong to you collectively. And this ownership right is confirmed by the Federal Abandoned Shipwreck Act of 1987 that became law in 1988. And this is the legal definition of what underwater archaeological resources are, but I'd like to ask you, yes, I'm going to put you on the spot. When I say underwater archaeological resource, what do you think of? What kind of things? Don't be shy. There's not a lot of us here. We're all good friends. Ships. Yes. Shipwrecks. That's usually the first thing people think of. What else?
Artifacts lost at sea.
Artifacts, objects, things. Yep. What else? There's more than that. How about ancient cultures that lived here before European colonization? They used boats too. And we're going to talk and learn about some of those in a minute. So by law, it includes things, abandoned properties, artifacts, treasure troves, or sunken ships that have remained unclaimed for 100 years or more, or which are valued at $5,000 or more, or any other objects 100 years old or judged by the board to be of historical value, which are located inside, upon, or around said resources within the inland and coastal waters of the Commonwealth, as defined by law, or upon the lands thereunder. And as I said, the Abandoned Shipwreck Act is a federal law that the laws that were created for the state predate the Abandoned Shipwreck Act by more than a decade. But the federal law also confirms what the state was asserting in terms of its ownership, because the federal law, it transferred title to shipwrecks in state waters to the states and created advisory guidelines for how state programs could operate, state programs like ours. And the way that states manage their underwater archaeological resources varies quite a bit from state to state. Even though there's a lot more states that have coastlines and have bodies of water in them, there's only, I believe it's 9 states in the US right now that have a state underwater archaeologist office and position. So there's not a lot of us, but so the federal guidelines help organize how we do these programs and how we manage state resources in addition to our state laws. We issue 3 different kinds of permits, and no person in the state can remove, displace, damage, or destroy any underwater archaeological resource except if you have a permit from us to do so. So archaeology if you're excavating, is inherently destructive. So that's why we need to have permits for that kind of work. But we also permit, through our reconnaissance permits, we permit non-disturbance surveys. And that's the kind of the first tier of our permits. We have the excavation permits to cover the removal and excavation of artifacts from sites. And then we have special use permits for companies that are doing compliance archaeology. So if they're going to build an offshore wind farm, there has to be archaeology done to ensure that no important sites are going to be disturbed. So most of the work that I had done in my career was that kind of work, where I'd be getting special use permits from my predecessor or the board to go out and do surveys, pre-impact surveys before projects were built. And our permittees, they range from individual sport divers to professional archaeologists to corporate ventures. And we have a few exceptions to our permits. We have 40 exempted sites. These are shipwrecks that are marked by these stars, the yellow stars in the map, that are all over all along the coast, and where we don't issue permits for people to collect artifacts from these sites, but they can't do any excavation at the sites. Then we have one that's most commonly we see issued and used as one of these exemptions to our permits, which is the isolated finds permit, or forms that we have, that if somebody finds something, say you're walking on a beach, you find something that's all by itself, and you'd like to keep it, well, you can apply to the state for us to transfer title to you to that object, provided that it's not part of a larger site. It really is an isolated find. So that's one of the other exemptions to permitting. And then we have one underwater archaeological preserve, the White Squall of Wellfleet. And then there's a court case exception that we have, and that's the Witta shipwreck off the coast of Cape Cod. That ship started to be salvaged prior to the passage of the Abandoned Shipwreck Act, so it was grandfathered in. That salvage work was grandfathered in. So we don't own that resource. Private company owns that resource. And then if for some reason you were to find yourself in violation of the state laws that apply to underwater archaeological resources, there are penalties. It's a misdemeanor offense if you're convicted, and it's punishable by a fine of not more than $1,000, imprisonment for 6 months, or both, and you'd have to forfeit all the artifacts. So, and we do, nobody's been prosecuted under this law, but we have situations where we bring in law enforcement to investigate or stop somebody from doing things. Most of the time, people just don't know that those kind of laws exist. And so we usually are in an education mode in that case. We'll get the artifacts back, but we'll make sure that we educate them that, no, it's not okay to take this shipwreck apart. It's definitely not okay. So if you have ever an interest in studying a site and getting a BUAR permit, you're more than welcome to do so. Or if you're just interested in learning more about the state's underwater archaeology program, or have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. The easiest way to find and get in touch with me is simply to Google MABUAR, Massachusetts Board of Underwater Archaeological Resources, and you'll see my email address. Just send me an email, and I would love to hear from you. Love to talk to you about underwater archaeology. And our website has a ton of pretty useful and interesting information on it. We've got a description of kind of what I just described, what we do, the permit and exemption requirements, the laws and regulations, information about exempted shipwreck sites, our underwater archaeological preserves. And then when we meet 5 times a year. And the schedule of those meetings is there. We also have policy guidance documents, the educational programs that we do. And then there's a listing of the board members, as well as some underwater archaeological links, including to a study that was done by my predecessor on the Battle of Chelsea Creek, which the anniversary of that battle just happened a couple months ago. And are any of you familiar with that battle? So that was a battle, an important battle that was fought just after the Battle of Bunker Hill, and resulted in the first capture of an enemy ship in the Revolutionary War. The HMS Diana was captured and destroyed. And Yeah, it happened right in Chelsea Creek. And the link to the report is available on the website. So that's kind of the background about BUAR and the laws that we operate within at BUAR. But what does Dave's daily day at work, what's that like? Well, we do a lot of project review. So everything from culvert replacements, bridge replacements, anything that's going to impact the submerged lands of the Commonwealth, and requires any kind of a permit, we get those projects to review and comment on and scope for surveys. So we see about 1,500 of those a year. As I said, we have 5 meetings a year, public meetings that I chair, and we have at the moment we have 25 active permittees that we're administering. So there's a lot going on. And then I do 10 to 15 of these public outreach programs a year, as well as I do a lot of field work. I'm usually out in the field 10 or so times a year all around the state. I do a lot of tribal engagement. I'm in communication regularly with the Massachusetts Commission on Indian Affairs. And then I work with the tribal historic preservation officers from the 2 federally recognized tribes, as well as the state recognized tribes, on project review typically. And then I coordinate a lot with various state and federal agencies, asking questions, getting advice, providing advice. And that includes everybody from the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management to the Massachusetts Division of Marine Fisheries. So it's a whole variety of different state agencies and all these acronyms. NOAA, you may be familiar with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the National Park Service, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Coast Guard, U.S. EPA, Massachusetts Historical Commission, Department of Conservation Resources. So we work with all these folks and collaborate on projects and project review. And then we are currently working on a project that I'm going to tell you quite a bit about, and that's a statewide assessment of vulnerability of coastal cultural resources, climate change-related coastal hazards. And that's something we've been working on since 2023 and are just starting to wrap up. And that's a project of special merit that was funded by NOAA. And then I should mention that the public education outreach programs that we do a lot of work with the trustees of reservations, especially at their Crane Estate site, where we have a shipwreck that I'm going to talk to you about in a second, that was impacted by erosion, and we had to create we didn't have to, but we created an educational program and a site monitoring program to deal with the management challenge that the shipwreck site gave us and the trustees. And the shipwreck's located on trustee property, so it made sense for us to work together on that. So what kind of underwater archaeological resources do we have in Massachusetts? I asked the question, what types of resources are they? And somebody mentioned shipwrecks. And that's the thing that I think most people think of. And this beautiful shipwreck, this is an 1875 Essex-built schooner that sank in 1909 that looked like that and was on this beach for about 111 years. And it's one of at least 3,500 that we have reported shipwrecks, vessel casualties in Massachusetts waters. It's probable that number is twice that large. These are just the reported ones. These are just the ones that get documented. But many, especially earlier ones or smaller vessels or vessels that were simply abandoned, they don't typically get the documentation. So my predecessor and I both agree that it's probably a number that's closer to double that. Why do we have so many shipwrecks in Massachusetts? Well, it's because we've got a large coastline. We've got a nearly 2,000-mile long coastline on the Atlantic Ocean. We've got lots of bays and sounds and protected water bodies that make good harbors. We've got over 4,000 miles of rivers. And somebody I was talking to earlier about the water bodies here that are kind of the major ones mentioned the Connecticut River, and that's certainly one of the most important ones in the state. And we've got a 500 plus year history of Euro-American maritime activity as a result of the early colonization and exploration of Massachusetts. We also have, again, I mentioned that it's not just Euro-American resources that we have here, but we have a much longer history of human occupation by the indigenous people of Massachusetts. So all this human presence, all this human activity with maritime or water focus is what has resulted in our state having such incredible underwater archaeological heritage. In terms of the shipwrecks, if we look at where they occur along the coast, it's not random. It seems to be a result of several different variables. A lot of it has to do with geography and also hubs of trade. So in this map, the red areas that you see, those are where we have documented in our inventory over 100 shipwrecks off these communities. And then the yellow is 26 to 99, and the blue is 1 to 25. And so what do you notice about where the most shipwrecks are located? Boston's a hot spot, right? Because that's a hub. That's a place where lots of ships are coming and going. It's a transportation hub, a trade hub, and an immigration hub. But where else? There's some other places that don't have as large populations, but they have a lot of shipwrecks. Nantucket, right? Nantucket was a place where there was maritime activity very early on. And it's also a place that, like the tip of Cape Cod, like Cape Ann, Rockport, that area, like Monomoy, what do they do geographically, or what can we say about those things in terms of how they relate to the space around them? They stick out, right? They're obstructions. So if you imagine, if we could think back and imagine all these ships that are traveling to all these places all had tracking devices on them, and we could look at a time lapse of these ships traveling to and from all these different ports, and imagine all these lines that are recorded as these ships do this. You've probably seen this with planes, right? You look at a map and it shows where all the planes are and where they're going. You begin to realize that, oh, there's a pattern to this, and there is. And it has to do with maritime activity, population densities, and obstructions and hazards to navigation. And so as a result, we've got a list of about, these are like the top 10, I guess, of the places that have the most shipwrecks. And that's places like Boston, Chatham, Gloucester, Marblehead, Nantucket, Provincetown, Rockport, and Scituate. Funny, Monson's not on the list. Oh, wonder why. And in looking at the data, looking at the database that we have of reported wrecks, you're able to conclude that we have kind of an average Massachusetts shipwreck, and that is a schooner of about 100 feet long and 300 tons with a wooden hull dating from the second half of the 1800s. It's less than 20 years old at the time it's lost. It's carrying a bulk cargo like oil or coal, clay, lime, stone, lumber, timber, or fish on its way to a Massachusetts port that either stranded, burned, foundered, and these usually happen during the winter and the fall off the coasts of either Gloucester, Rockport, Boston, or Nantucket. I mentioned ancient indigenous underwater archaeological resources, and we certainly have those here. We have those in the form of watercraft. So the images that you see on the left, that's of a dugout canoe, or in Algonquin, or Nipmuc. We're in Nipmuc country here. The term for that type of watercraft is a mashoon, and it's spelled lots of different ways, but mashoon is the way it's pronounced. So we have watercraft here in Massachusetts that are indigenous. We also have these submerged ancient landscapes, and although the picture on the right is not from Massachusetts waters. It's from Rhode Island waters off the coast of Block Island, Rhode Island. We do have these same types of landscapes here. And what you see there is that's a member of the Narragansett Indian tribe. She was a student at the University of Rhode Island when I was working there. She participated in the project that we did. We were trying to develop methods for identifying these ancient native sites offshore. And the thing what she's hovering over, and when I took this picture, it made the hair stand up on my arms and on my neck. And it still does to this day as I look at it and I think about it, because she's hovering over we radiocarbon dated the organic material that she's hovering over. She's looking at a tree stump in its original growth position, embedded in the seafloor, surrounded by all that lumpy stuff that you see. That's root mat. It's all the smaller rootlets that are all interconnected together. And soil, she's hovering over a landscape that's between 400 and 6,500 years old, that hasn't been occupied by another human being, her ancestors, for probably half that time at least, so thousands of years. And so to imagine if we were living 3,000 years ago, to imagine that at some point in the future a descendant would be in this alien garb flying above that landscape, revisiting it, I don't know if it's time travel or what the thing about that's amazing, but it's amazing to think that moment, to be able to witness that moment of this person from the future visiting this landscape of the past. Incredible. Anyway, here in Massachusetts, we're very lucky, and especially here in Western Mass, and this is a project that is taking place in Lake Quinsigamond between Worcester and Shrewsbury. And that's Project Moshun. And this is a project that is being led by the Hassanimisco Nipmuc Tribal Council. And the director of the project is Hassanimisco Nipmuc Tribal Council person and tribal member Cheryl Stetler. And the Hassanimisco Nipmuc Band has had a permit with the Board of Underwater Archaeological Resources for 24 years. So they've been working on this project for a long time. And what this project is it's a project to study and manage it started out as 3 dugout canoes, or Mashunish. That's the plural word for Moshun. And the first 2 that were found, there was one that was found by diver Mike Brower, and then a group of us from the board was out with volunteer divers going to inspect and measure and document this Moshun. Another one of our divers, Chris Hugo, found a Moshun, but it wasn't the same one. It was a second one. And that ended up being called Moshun 1 because that was the one we thought we were on. But Moshun 2 is actually the one that was found first. And in this illustration that you see here on the right, on the left, there's the plan view of the 2 together. And then this is a profile view. And you're probably wondering, why are they full of rocks? What would filling a Moshun, a log boat, do for that boat? Make it sink. Yeah. So these were intentionally sunk for winter storage, because in the wintertime, when it gets very dry, and so the wood splits and cracks, and if you get splits and cracks in your boat, it's going to fill with water and sink. And so it's better to store it underwater, where it'll retain its moisture and it won't split and crack, and then just recover it when it starts to warm up. The problem is, as you can see in this profile view, where they set them it looks like there's a little shelf there, and there probably was, but then it slopes down pretty precipitously. And Cheryl has done some historical research and found that around the time that at least one of them we've radiocarbon dated, around the time that these date, so about 400 years old, there was a major earthquake. And there's a hypothesis that she has, that maybe these things were shaken and they slid down the slope down into deeper water where they couldn't be reached, they couldn't be recovered. While doing additional dives in the lake, diver Mike Brower found machine number 3, which was in much shallower water. It was on the opposite side of the lake, and it was on a hard, kind of gravelly bottom. And it was probably impacted by ice formation, which crushed it, or maybe waves, or I don't know. But it definitely was not as well preserved as the other two. And what you see here is, at first we thought it might be the bottom. I have a feeling it might be the side, but it had been stored intentionally because it was filled with rocks as well. I served for 19 years as the project archaeologist before I took the job with the state, and then I'm the one who's issuing the permits, so I can't be the project archaeologist on the project. So now my predecessor, Vic Mastone, who had been the state underwater archaeologist for 32 years before me, he's the project archaeologist. We've swapped roles. But in 2010 and 2012, when I was still the project archaeologist, I was doing a marine survey before they built the new Route 9 bridge. And so we took advantage of having all this great marine survey equipment in the water with us for that archaeological survey that was done for compliance reasons, and then did a survey. I got the surveyors to volunteer their time and equipment to do a pretty extensive survey of the lake on behalf of the tribe and Cheryl. And so we went out with side scan sonars on 2 different years, 2010 and 2012. And those 2 sonars, they were different. One pinged at a rate of 500 kilohertz, the other one at 900 kilohertz. And the difference is resolution. The higher frequency one provides a more detailed record. And so we had an opportunity to take more data with the higher resolution system. So I said, let's try to do that. And our goals were to image the 3 machinish on the bottom, and then obtain baseline lake bed imaging, because we didn't have that, and then identify any other resources that are there. And just so you know, none of you are marine surveyors who have used side scan sonar, probably a lot in the past, right? No. So when I say side scan sonar, I'm talking about an instrument that sends out an acoustic signal into the water. So it sends sound waves out to the water. And then it's got a receiver that takes those reflected sounds back and processes them and turns them into images. And what you get is, it would be like if I took 2 flashlights in my younger son's bedroom at night and flashed them kind of at an oblique angle on the floor and walked along. That's the image you get of the seafloor. You're getting a kind of a planned, kind of a bit of an angled plan view of the bottom. And so what you see in this image, so this is a satellite image of Lake Quinsigamond, and you can see the dark areas, the water, this lighter stuff, that's the side scan sonar record that we collected. It's a very large scale view of it, so you can't see any of the details in it, but that's where we went and collected data, and you end up with records like this. So you remember that little sketch that we had of the 2 machinish near each other, 1 and 2. This is an acoustic image. This is a side scan sonar image of the same thing, and it's like our back is, or the bottom would be, if we were looking at this image, the shoreline is behind us. The lighter area, that's a gravel slope that's sloping down away from us. And then you can see the 2 log boats here. They've slid down an embankment, and the dark area that's up high here, that's the soft, less reflective mud. I say less reflective. So when the side scan sonar sound hits the bottom, it bounces off, and anything that is hard is going to appear bright, and anything that's soft is going to absorb the sound. So the soft mud, that's why it looks darker than the gravel that's on the slope. And you can even see the rocks in the machinish. So they're in about 25 feet of water. It varies a little bit depending on lake levels, but that's about how deep they are. And this is an example of what I'm talking about. So this is a 500 kilohertz image on the right, and this is the 900 kilohertz image on this bigger image here. And so you can see the resolution difference between the two. This is much more detailed. And these are just some photographs. One of the reasons why these have been preserved as long as they have is because they're in water that's pretty opaque. I mean, it's pitch black when you're on the bottom because no sunlight can make it down to that depth because there's so much particulate matter in the water. So it's not a place that people generally are going to be attracted to go dive in because it's just not clear water. So these things have been hidden basically from everyone for hundreds of years. This is the first one that was found here. You can see the rocks. This is a seat that's at the back. Another side scan image, and these are drawings, measured drawings that I made of the wreck, or not the wreck, the machine. And this is the number 3. And you can see that it's not anywhere near as well preserved.
How long?
They're about 15 feet long. They're 4 to 5 meters long. So why are these important? Well, they're important because we don't have a lot of these that are, you've probably, you've seen pictures of them. I mean, from time to time they're found and, they end up in museums, but we don't have a lot of them. And we have very few of them that are still in situ. They're still in their undisturbed context, in good condition, accessible for documentation, and eventually possibly excavation and recovery. And these machinists date from an important time period at that transitional period of contact when indigenous cultures are being displaced and the production of these types of watercraft is ending. And then the entire collaborative process of this project, from discovery, documentation, excavation, recovery, conservation, and eventually public display and interpretation, it's an incredible educational opportunity for lots of different communities of people, the indigenous communities as well as non-indigenous communities, and local communities. And the work that's been done, that Cheryl has done with the tribe and with BAR, and all the public outreach that she's done within the tribe and outside the tribe, that last year kind of culminated into a really great project where the tribe built a new machine and paddled it on Flint Pond, so that's adjacent to Lake Quinsigamond. But for the first time in hundreds of years, the tribe was able to build a new machine and get out and paddle on the lakes. So as she said, these are her words, this project and the discovery of the machine and the education about their importance, it's a powerful cultural outreach event, the building of the machine, that deeply engaged the tribal members, but also laid groundwork for meaningful networking with non-indigenous organizations. And it's really important because for the management of the underwater sites, it's just like me in my position. I can't do it alone. The tribe can't manage those sites alone. They need people they need eyes on the lake, eyes on the sites to make sure that they're not being disturbed, they're not being vandalized. So she's done, and the tribe's done a really good job of engaging the community in that kind of support network for the project. And I'm looking forward to, they're in the process now of talking about, what do they want to have happen to these sites in the future? Do they want to recover one? Do they want to take on the perpetual responsibility of caring for one of these if it's recovered? Or do they want to leave them there and continue to study them and manage them while they're still underwater?
Maybe the idea would be to discover more of these first before starting to excavate them out.
Yeah, and so the survey that we did identify a number of different other side scan sonar contacts that could be more machinish, as well as some other types of resources. So they are definitely doing exactly that. They're thinking about this from a lake-wide perspective based on what they know about the resources that are there and considering what to do with these within that context. Okay, because we're in Monson and we're not in Cape Cod, I want to also talk about the Morton Pond Machine. And this is a machine that was found in the 1930s when the Quabbin Reservoir was being developed, when they were doing all the preparation to create that reservoir. And just so you know, Morton Pond was a little pond that was down by where the Goodnoe Dike is, on the kind of southeastern corner of the what's now the reservoir. And here you can see these are guys that found it when they were doing this, when they were doing all the clearing of the land before they flooded the area. They encountered this machine and recovered it. You can see it. It's in the Swift River Valley Historical Society Museum in North Salem. And Cheryl coordinated with the museum, and we went out last summer on a very hot July day to document it because it hadn't been recorded. So we went out and took some measurements. But this is one of the, I think there's only maybe one other one, and it's more in the eastern part of the state. I can't remember the museum that it's in, but I think there's one other one that's accessible, that's been recovered. So these are rare, and Cheryl and I are going to be giving a talk next month at the museum about the documentation work that we did on this. So we'll communicate, and I'll give you the date. So I mentioned watercraft, but there's also these indigenous landscapes that I told you about, the one on Rhode Island. Why are these there? Why are there landscapes that were occupied by people that are now underwater? Well, they're there because sea level used to be some 400 feet lower at the height of the last glacial period 20-some thousand years ago than it is today. And the continental shelf, most of it was exposed land available for habitation by humans and animals and plants. And it was inhabited by humans, animals, and plants. And as the ice sheet retreated and the ice melted and flowed back into the oceans, sea level began to rise and resubmerge all this landscape. How do we know this? We know this for a whole variety of reasons. Geological sciences have well-documented glaciation and sea level rise. But we know this from serendipitous finds of chunks of this old land as far out as places like George's Banks, where fishing trawlers dragging the bottom have pulled up pieces of trees like that one that I showed you the picture of that the diver was hovering over. Pieces of trees, fossilized animal teeth like the mastodon tooth that I'm holding there, and also artifacts. Artifacts have also been dragged up by fishermen. So there's ample evidence that this was once a terrestrial landscape occupied by animals, plants, and people. But underwater archaeology has always been about the thing that you mentioned as soon as I said, what are underwater archaeological resources? And you said shipwrecks. Underwater archaeology is a fairly new discipline in the scientific field. It's only about 60 years old. And the focus had always been on shipwrecks, not on these ancient landforms. In fact, a lot of archaeologists thought that those landforms were completely destroyed by sea level rise and erosion. And what we're finding is that no, that's not the case. While most of those landscapes have been destroyed, there are places and instances that you can predict where they are, where you've got preservation of these ancient landforms, and that they do contain cultural sites, they do contain archaeological remains. And one of the first times that we demonstrated this was a project I did when they were proposing to build the Cape Wind Farm out in Nantucket Sound. And we did all the remote sensing surveying that we did in Lake Quinsigamond for the bridge project. So we used magnetometer and sub-bottom profilers and side scan sonars. And we also did coring to ground truth the things we were seeing in this data. And we found evidence of a 12,000-year-old intact forest floor. And so that told us that if we can have preserved landscapes in buried situations that are contextually intact, we can have archaeological deposits in those too. They're important. So it's kind of a new subfield of underwater archaeology, trying to determine how to locate these sites, how to locate these ancient landforms. But we do certainly have them here. We also have historical coastal infrastructure. We've got old shipyards like this one in East Boston. We've got lighthouses. We've got seawalls, wharfs, piers, you name it. There's a lot along the coast. And we have historical aircraft wrecks. We have a number of World War II aircraft that were used in training that went down off our coast. So quite a variety of different types of resources, and that's just a thumbnail sketch of what they are, just to give you a taste of that. In terms of the largest management challenge that I currently face in my job, that is the threats to coastal cultural resources from sea level rise related erosion, and the responses, our management responses to those threats to life and property. So to combat the impacts from sea level rise, coastal communities are doing all kinds of things, and with the help of the state, the help of the federal government. And that includes everything from harvesting sand offshore to replenish beaches to putting riprap along shorelines to stabilize and protect the built resources on the other side of them, to doing less impactful kind of organic shoreline stabilization projects. These are all important. They're all good to do, but they do have impacts. And so it's not just the natural forces that are threatening coastal cultural resources, it's also our responses to those natural forces. And so these resources are getting threatened from multiple angles. And that's a problem. That's that's a challenge that I need to deal with. I've been in the job for 6 years, and in the first 3 years of being on the job, I got multiple reports from people. Citizens like yourselves would contact our office and say, hey, I saw something on the beach, or hey, there's something on this shoal that is eroding out. I think it might be a shipwreck. Those reports began to accumulate and accelerate in their frequency. And I started to plot them. So the map on the right with the red stars, those are the communities where I was getting reports of things that were becoming exposed from erosion. And so as I'm thinking about this, I'm like, well, I know the state's done studies on the portions of the coast that are eroding the fastest. So I looked at one study that was done about 15 years ago to document which portions of the coast were eroding the quickest. And so the map you see on the left with the red dots, that shows those red dots are where the coast is eroding the quickest. And you don't have to be a marine archaeologist or a scientist to look at those two maps and say, there seems to be some connection there between where David's getting all these reports of things eroding and where the coastline is eroding the quickest. Back to our friend, this shipwreck. This is the Ada K. Damon, and it's on Steep Hill. It was on Steep Hill Beach in Ipswich at the Crane Estate, the trustee's property. This is what it looked like in September of 2019 when I came, shortly after I had started in my position. And one of our board members actually, who's the marine archaeologist on our board, he had told me that, hey, that wreck is becoming more and more exposed. We ought to get to that site and get it documented. We've got an opportunity here. And it's like, yeah, we do. Let's do that. So we were planning on doing that. And then in September of 2020, so now we're in COVID time. So that kind of slowed us down. But in September of 2020, I get a phone call from the trustees saying, hey, you remember that really cool shipwreck we had on Steep Hill Beach? It's gone. I said, gone? What do you mean gone? It's gone. It's actually, well, it's there, but it's in pieces spread across the entirety of Steep Hill Beach. These pieces were spread over 18 acres of beach. And it happened overnight. And it happened because a hurricane had passed off our coast by a couple hundred miles. So it wasn't even that close. But there was wind, and it was also at a time of the autumnal king tides, really high tides and really low tides. And so in the course of 2 tide cycles, this wreck got shredded, never to look like that again. This is what it looked like. This is like 3 days after it was torn apart. Bummer, huh? Yeah. Yep. It's not often that you have a shipwreck that wrecks twice, like the Archaeological Dam did. But it is as much of a tragedy as it is to have a resource like that be torn apart. There's a silver lining in the cloud. And the silver lining is that as these sites are eroding, they're becoming exposed. So in some cases, we're seeing them for the very first time and becoming knowledgeable about them. Or they haven't been seen in a very long time, but they're now becoming accessible. And parts of them that have previously been inaccessible, even if like the Archaeological Dam, they were exposed partially, have also become accessible. So the tearing apart of this ship allowed us to see portions of the hull that even if it was not full of sand, we wouldn't have been able to see because the thing was still intact. So we started to be able to see details like saw marks, so we could see what technologies were used to cut the lumber that was used in the wreck. We're able to see, you can see scalloping on these frames here, where they used an adze to shape the timbers. Here you can see a repair. You can start to see all these details that were missing from the portion of the ship that was exposed. And we could even see the hand of the shipwright. This is a Roman numeral scribed into one of the ribs or the floor timbers that went right over the keel. And as they were placed in the ship, ships have pointy ends, so the ribs have to change shape and they have to be placed in order within the hull. So this was how those were marked. So we get to see all these incredible details. And, so what, Dave? You get to see incredible details about how they cut the timbers or how they thought about where to put the frames. Why is that important? Well, it's important because shipbuilding, we'll all agree, was an important trade. It was technologically important. Ships were the most complex things that we were producing in the times of wooden sail and steamboats. The knowledge of how to do that was in people's heads based on experience that they got working in shipyards as young people, and then eventually as older people, usually acting as foremen or owners of the yard. So moments like this, where you see an elder transferring knowledge and information about the design of a hull, he's holding a half hull model that shipwrights used to build ships from. When these guys pass away, that knowledge is gone. And the only place that it's recorded, because those half hull models, there's not many of these that survive. And in some cases, shipwrights wouldn't want their competitors to steal their design ideas, and they'd burn them. They'd throw them away. So when the guys who conceived how to make these ships passed away, all that knowledge left with them. And the only place we can find it again is through the archaeological study of the remains of these ships that they built. So in addition to shipwrecks, we also have ancient indigenous sites that are being impacted by erosion. This is out on Martha's Vineyard. This is the Lucy Vincent site. There is an ancient burial that's located nearby that's eroding out. This is a wooden, we believe it's a wooden bow. And it would be if it is, it would be the first archaeological example of a bow found in the Northeast. And this was found in one of those ancient landscapes that was exposed and eroding in North Plymouth. And the bow was found adjacent to this projectile point, this arrowhead that you see here, this quartz arrowhead. The landform that this came from is completely been destroyed in the last several years by erosion. The bow we've retained, it's being kept wet, and we just sent out a tiny sample to get radiocarbon dated. This is a site in Marshfield. There's a shipwreck site that this gentleman alerted me to, but adjacent to the shipwreck site is this large preserved landform that's now eroding along the beach. It's an organic landform, same thing as the one that I showed you, the diver hovering above it. There's roots, there's old tree stumps. These things are all over the place, and they're all becoming exposed. This is a shipwreck on the south shore of Nantucket that was in the news a few years ago. Also a situation where you have erosion taking place. This is a fish weir, wooden fish trap, sort of a fence-like structure that was created to capture fish swimming on the Castle Neck River, right behind. If you've ever been to Crane Beach, this is on the backside of Crane Beach, right at the tip. I was alerted to this weir, photographed it, did some measurements, took a sample to have it radiocarbon dated. It was on trustee property. They paid for that radiocarbon dating, and it dates to about 500 years old. It's pre-contact. It's one of only, I think there's only one other archaeological example of a wooden fish weir. There's lots of stone ones, but a wooden one. And that's in Boston, the Boylston Street fish weir that was found when they were excavating to put in the subway.
So did you leave it there?
So we left this there, but the landform that it's on has eroded away. It's gone. This was on the tip of Castle Neck, and that tip, because of sea level rise and because of different patterns of storms, has been rapidly eroding to the north. And where this was is gone.
So then what's left of the
So what's left of this? Nothing.
did you say?
We took one piece to have it radiocarbon dated. This was another situation where it was a different hurricane, but there was a hurricane approaching the next day, and the people that found it bravely put their boat back in the water, took me out to it so that we could document it and get the sample before it was, yeah. I mean, this wood was like a soft stick of butter. Like it was waterlogged and very, very soft. But it was preserved because it had been in wet sand and buried for hundreds of years. This is a shipwreck that's off the coast of Essex at Canomo Point. This is March of 2022. To give you a sense of how fast these sites change, you saw the Ada K. Damon. So this is in March of 2022. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 framing stubs or ribs that are sticking up out of the sediment. Here you can see, note this channel right here. This is Walker's Creek. It dumps into Essex River. This is in October the following year. So remember, we could only see 6 little frame stubs. Now we can see the entire outline of the hull. This is that same time. We had a volunteer took an aerial shot for us of the wreck. So this is October 2023. This is May of 2025. Big change. And note where the location of Walker's Creek is. It's not here yet. Now it's actually flowing along the port side of the hull, and you see all this dark area in here. As the water's now flowing, it's flowing in right into the hull, and it's scouring out the bow and it's scouring out the center of the ship. So I have no doubt that in another year, this is going to look a lot like the Ada K. Damon did before it came apart. And so that we don't have the same situation with the Ada K. Damon, I've been regularly going back to the site and documenting it as it gets exposed. This is just another view taken last month of the same wreck. This is a nearby wreck in the Essex River that also is eroding because of the shift in the channel location. This is not at dead low tide. At dead low tide, this thing was actually on dry land. So this is February of 2023. This is May of 2023. This is August of 2023. The channel is migrating towards the wreck. Here you can see some of that same kind of scouring that we saw on the other wreck, because now the channel is flowing over the end of the wreck. And in this case, the wreck is perpendicular to the location of the channel. So it went from what I showed you in February of 2023 to October, it completely exposed the entire hull. And as of May of 2024, the channel has since migrated further to the west. And now this is in the center of the channel, completely subtidal. This is at a moon low tide. It's under about 10 feet of water at moon low tide. You can't get to it unless you're diving now. And it's not just shipwrecks. It's not just ancient native archaeological sites. It's built resources along the coast too, such as all these historic homes in Scituate. And then you've got a tide mill in Quincy, the Southern Tide Mill, that's being undermined by erosion caused by sea level rise. So what do? Obviously, the situation that we had with the Ada K. Damon was non-optimal. Reacting as opposed to thinking ahead and planning for is not the optimal way of managing resources. And it was upsetting when I got that call. We reacted and managed as best as we could in the moment, and we protected life by alerting the Coast Guard, alerting the harbor master, and they put out a notice to mariners to make sure that people were aware there could be wood debris in the water. There wasn't; it was all waterlogged, so it all stayed sunken and it stayed close to the beach for a while. But we had to manage for safety, and then we had to figure out, okay, what do we do now? Well, we've got an opportunity here. So we did baseline documentation of the site, recorded it as much as we could, and then created programs to track the site's changes over time, which we did with the trustees and through educational programming. But one of the other things we did was we applied for a NOAA Project of Special Merit grant, where we got funding to do the very first vulnerability assessment of the entire Massachusetts coastal cultural resources and the threat to them from coastal hazards and sea level rise. And so the idea was that we would combine the existing environmental data for shoreline change and threats to the shore from flooding with what we knew about where sites had been documented, both by the Massachusetts Historical Commission and by BUAR. And so it was a GIS exercise. GIS is a mapping tool that we use where we combined environmental information with known cultural site locations to get a sense of where things were vulnerable. And the end result of this are recommendations and reported results in two forms, one in a technical report, and then another it's called a story map or a geo-narrative that's more accessible to the public with general information about the project, but also with data that can be downloaded so that agencies like mine and others who are responsible for managing coastal cultural resources can use this information to help guide them in proactively planning for the management of these resources. And so to give you a sense of what the study looks like in terms of the mapping, so based on combining all that environmental information about changes to the shoreline and coastal dynamics, we created this vulnerability extent by combining that data. And then our analysis extent, so our project area was developed from that vulnerability extent. And that's where we looked within this gridded area that we created around that for reported and known cultural sites. And then we can't map the individual locations of those sites because for everything except built resources, which we all can see because they're above ground, the archaeological resources, that information is protected. So we created these heat maps to give us a sense of where are the majority of the sites and where are they most vulnerable. So and we looked at 4 different categories of site types. We looked at built historic properties, built resources. We looked at non-indigenous archaeological sites, so Euro-American archaeological sites, indigenous archaeological sites, and then BUAR inventoried underwater archaeological sites in the intertidal. So these are the map of density on the left, the green and blue of built resources, and then where they're vulnerable. This is for post-contact period, non-indigenous archaeological resources and where they're vulnerable. And indigenous sites, and then the underwater ones. And what that resulted in is us producing a map and a tabular list of the communities that have either high or medium high vulnerability for one or more of these resource types. So we have 23 communities along the coast of Massachusetts that have that fall into that category, and those are all marked in yellow in the map. And then we have 6 of these 23 that have at least one of the 4 resources that is a high management priority area. That means it has resources that fall within that high category of vulnerability. Those are marked in the pinkish crosshatching. And then we have 8 of these communities where we have more than one of the categories of resources that is either a high or medium high priority area for management. And those are marked with the blue stars. So what this map is intended to do is to guide folks like myself into thinking about strategies. Okay, what do we do next? Well, we need to inform these coastal communities that this is the case, and then begin to work with them on a more detailed tier 2 level study where we identify resources along their coasts that we can get documented, that we can monitor, we can engage the citizens in the stewardship and science that we're doing, because again, I can't do this all myself, to proactively and adaptively manage these sites before they're gone, to take advantage of their exposure when we can and learn as much as we can and protect them when we can. So what can you do as an individual to help us with this? Well, if you go on our webpage and say you're vacationing this summer and walking along the coast and you see something that looks like an archaeological site, please let us know about it. And it's easy to do. We have a 1-page form that you can download from our website, or you can email me and talk to me and I'll help you fill it out. In some cases, I will come out and look at the site as well. But you can report these through our SHIPS program, the Shoreline Heritage Identification Partnership Strategy form that we have. Also, and this is a coming soon kind of thing, we are about to become a partner in a national program. It's called the Shipwreck Tagging Archaeological Management Program, or STAMP, that's managed by the Florida Public Archaeology Network and the University of West Florida, where they maintain a database of wrecks and pieces of wrecks that have been tagged, and the state will have our own tags that'll have a little QR code on them that you can scan if you're walking and you see something and it has a tag on it. You can use your cell phone to scan the QR code. That'll pull up the STAMP website, and it's kind of like our SHIPS form. You can put in information right there into your phone and send it to them, and then they'll retain that information. And then what we can do as the state of Massachusetts, we can access that database and see where these things are moving through space, because these things move. We've measured, we've documented one of the pieces of the Ada K Damon moving a 1/4 mile in the last several years. And the STAMP program has documented pieces of shipwrecks moving across state lines more than 3 miles. So these are dynamic types of resources, and we want to get a handle on what's happening to them and where they are. And so the STAMP program, we think, is the best way for us to do that. So hopefully I have convinced you that anytime you're by the coast or you're walking by the water here in central Massachusetts or western Massachusetts and you see something, you know who to now call and talk to. How many of you knew you had a state underwater archaeologist? Did you know you had it? Did you know there was an office of the state underwater archaeologist? So that's a 0 for 5. Nobody knew. When I talk to bigger audiences, usually it's 1 or 2 out of an audience of about 50 people. So it's what makes, I think, doing these kind of talks important. And hopefully I'll be hearing from you if you happen to see anything that you think would be of interest to our office. And please do reach out if you'd like to talk about underwater archaeology anytime. Happy to do it. So thank you. And I'd be happy to take any questions.
We all
Have I been in the Alvin?
I don't know what it's called, this submersible?
They're super cool little submarine that's been around forever, and went to the Titanic and did all that stuff.
Yes.
I haven't been in the Alvin, but I've been in the NR-1.
Okay.
The NR-1 was the Navy's nuclear research submarine. It was 135 feet long. It was built in 1969, and it was the only deep submersible that the Navy had. And they had, prior to its construction, had to contract out for any recovery of things that they had dropped in deep water. And so they wanted a submarine that could do that. So that submarine had an arm, and it had windows. It was a submarine with windows. It had 3 viewports in the bow that you could look out. It also had sonar. In 1969, it was super high tech. And I got to dive in it in 2007, and it was deactivated in 2009. And I spent 3 days submerged in about from 1,000 to 400 feet of water with another scientist and a crew of 10 guys. And it was the coolest thing ever. The technology was cool. You know, I grew up in the era of people going to the moon and space being, you know, the place. Everybody wanted to be an astronaut. I did. This was the closest thing I could come to it. And the descent was dramatic, but the ascent was even more dramatic. The whole submarine was shaking. It wasn't making the sound of a rocket, but I was imagining myself, oh yeah, this is just like being in a rocket. And as cool as the technology was, the people who operated it, I was so impressed and so proud as an American that these were the folks who represent us in the Navy. I mean, just extraordinary people, amazing people. So I've never been in the Alvin, but I've been in something that's, I think, a little cooler. You can't fit as many people in the Alvin.
No, I didn't think so.
Can't go as long. The NR-1 could stay submerged, I think, for 30 days. Yeah. That's it? No more questions? Okay.
Great one.
Thank you very much, everybody.